Black Bear recognizes the man who once saved him. Then something shocking happens. The mist hung low in the valleys of the Sierra Nevada, wrapping the ancient pines in its ghostly embrace. Tom Bradley squinted through the haze, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel of his old Ford pickup. The truck's engine grumbled along the familiar forest road, a sound that had become as much a part of the mountain symphony as the wind through the trees or the call of hawks overhead. At 68, Tom's face had become a topographical map of his life, deep lines carved by sun and sorrow, with eyes that had witnessed both the cruelty and beauty of the natural world. His silver hair peeked out beneath a faded Forest Service cap, and his flannel shirt hung loosely on his frame, a testament to the weight he'd lost in recent years. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where he volunteered was still 20 minutes away, but Tom was in no hurry. These solitary morning drives were sacred to him, moments of communion with the mountains that had become his true home. After a lifetime of wandering, he'd been a fixture at the center for nearly 15 years now, longer than any other volunteer. The staff respected his intuitive understanding of wildlife, even if they sometimes found his solitary nature perplexing. As the truck rounded a bend, Tom's foot eased off the accelerator. Something inside him responded to this place, an old forest intersection where two dirt roads met beneath a canopy of sugar pines. He brought the truck to a complete stop, the engine idling as his eyes drifted to the small clearing on the eastern side of the crossroads. 6 years. Had it really been that long? The memories rose unbidden, the small trembling form curled against his chest, the sticky sweetness of honey-coated fingers, the surprising weight of responsibility that had both burdened and fulfilled him. Tom shook his head, trying to dislodge the thoughts. He'd promised himself he wouldn't do this anymore, wouldn't torture himself with questions that had no answers. As he reached for the gear shift, a movement in the underbrush caught his eye. Tom froze, his hands suspended in midair. Years in the wilderness had taught him to recognize the different ways animals move through the forest. The deliberate stalking of mountain lions, the bounding of deer, the lumbering of bears. This was unmistakably a bear. Tom's breath caught as a large black form emerged from the manzanita bushes at the edge of the clearing. The animal moved with difficulty, its gait uneven and labored. Even from this distance, Tom could see something was terribly wrong. The bear's front right paw wasn't touching the ground, and there was a glint of metal around it. "My God," Tom whispered, reaching for the binoculars he kept on the passenger seat. Through the lenses, the bear's condition became horrifyingly clear. A rusty iron trap had clamped around its front leg, the cruel teeth biting deep into flesh. The wound was clearly infected, angry red streaks visible even through the black fur. The bear was dangerously thin, its normally robust frame reduced to a skeletal silhouette. But it was the eyes that stopped Tom's heart, those eyes, amber-brown with flecks of gold in the iris. Unusual eyes that had once looked up at him with complete trust as he'd fed a tiny cub from a bottle. Eyes that had watched him intently as he demonstrated how to flip over rocks to find grubs. Eyes that had held a knowing gleam the day he'd led their owner to the edge of the forest and walked away. Spirit. The name came off Tom's lips as a question, though his heart already knew the answer. The bear swayed on its feet, clearly at the limits of its endurance. When their gazes locked, Tom saw a flicker of recognition that defied everything he'd been taught about wild animals. This was no coincidence. Spirit had found him at the exact spot where Tom had released him into the wild all those years ago. Tom's mind raced back through the years to a spring day when his life had changed forever. The poacher's campsite had been easy enough to find. Tom had been tracking the man for 3 days after hearing gunshots out of season. What he hadn't expected was the grisly trophy of a female black bear, her hide partially removed, her body left to rot. Tom had radioed it in, sick with the familiar rage that came with discovering such senseless killing. He'd been about to leave when he heard it, a weak, plaintive cry from a hollow beneath a fallen log. Inside, barely visible in the shadows, was a bear cub so small it couldn't have been more than a few months old. Its eyes were open but glazed with dehydration, its tiny body trembling with cold and fear. Protocol was clear: call the center, wait for the wildlife team, let them handle the orphaned cub. Tom had followed those rules dozens of times before. But something about this cub, the unusual markings on its chest forming a pale starburst pattern, or perhaps the way it looked directly at him without fear, made Tom hesitate. He'd overheard the center director just the week before discussing euthanasia protocols for cubs that showed too much comfort around humans. With the center already overcrowded, an underdeveloped cub with potential habituation issues would be considered a lost cause. Before he could reconsider, Tom had wrapped the cub in his jacket and carried it to his truck. Just until it was stronger, he told himself. Just until he could be sure the center would give it a chance. He named the cub Spirit, for the pale marking on its chest, for the tenacity that kept it alive against impossible odds, and for something intangible he sensed in those intelligent eyes. Tom's cabin, a small A-frame tucked away on 3 acres of forest land, became Spirit's temporary sanctuary. He converted his rarely used mudroom into a makeshift nursery, lining a large wooden box with soft blankets and keeping the small space warm with a carefully monitored space heater. The first nights were touch and go. The cub was severely malnourished, still without all its teeth, and traumatized by the loss of its mother. Tom stayed awake through the night, feeding Spirit a mixture of condensed milk and honey from a bottle every few hours. When the cub whimpered in its sleep, Tom would place his hand on its tiny back, the gentle pressure seeming to calm its nightmares. "You'll make it," he whispered, as much a prayer as a promise. "You're stronger than you know." By the second week, Spirit was gaining strength. Tom found himself talking to the cub constantly, explaining what he was doing as he prepared meals, narrating the weather outside, reading aloud from old nature journals. Spirit would watch him with those attentive eyes, head tilted slightly, as if absorbing every word. On cold nights, Tom would bring Spirit into the main room, where a stone fireplace provided both warmth and hypnotic entertainment for the curious cub. They would fall asleep there, the bear curled against Tom's side, both finding comfort in the unlikely companionship. But Tom knew this couldn't last. A black bear could grow to 500 pounds, a wild predator that belonged in the forest, not a cabin. Every moment of care came with the counterbalance of ensuring Spirit would someday thrive without him. And so began the most unusual education program the Sierra Nevada had ever witnessed. Tom Bradley, former forest ranger turned wildlife center volunteer, became a surrogate mother bear. He showed Spirit how to identify and dig up edible roots, how to uncover grubs and insects from rotting logs, how to recognize the distinctive shape of berry bushes. He demonstrated how to climb trees for safety, always ensuring the lessons took place far from any human trails or campsites. Using recordings from the Wildlife Center's library, he played the sounds of mountain lions, coyotes, and human voices, teaching Spirit to retreat to higher ground or dense cover when such noises approached. The fishing lessons proved the most challenging and ultimately the most rewarding. Tom spent hours standing knee-deep in a cold mountain stream, demonstrating the patience required to wait for trout to swim within reach. Spirit would watch from the bank, occasionally plunging in with eager but clumsy attempts that sent fish darting in all directions. After weeks of failed attempts, Tom arrived at the stream one morning to find Spirit already there, standing motionless in the shallows. The bear's concentration was absolute, eyes fixed on the water, body perfectly still. When a flash of silver passed beneath him, Spirit's paw moved with lightning speed, flipping a good-sized rainbow trout onto the bank. Tom had felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name as Spirit looked up at him, clearly seeking approval. The bear picked up the flopping fish and carried it over to Tom, dropping it at his feet with a soft chuffing sound. "You did it," Tom had said, his voice thick with pride and the first sting of impending loss. "You're going to be just fine on your own." The training continued through spring and into summer, each success bringing Spirit closer to independence, and Tom closer to the day he dreaded. As the cub grew into a juvenile bear, Tom began leaving him alone for longer periods, always returning to find Spirit had managed perfectly well without him. It wasn't enough, of course. Tom knew that 6 months wasn't long enough to impart all the knowledge a mother bear would have shared over 2 years. But Spirit was proving to be an exceptional student, and time was running out. The Wildlife Center had begun to question his frequent absences and distracted manner. His supervisor, Dr. Sarah Makela, had even made a surprise visit to his cabin one weekend, ostensibly to drop off a new volunteer schedule. Tom had barely managed to keep Spirit hidden in the back room, but the close call made it clear he couldn't maintain the secret much longer. The changing seasons would force his hand soon enough. Spirit needed to establish a territory and prepare for winter. It was time. Tom had chosen the forest intersection carefully, far enough from human settlements to give Spirit a chance to acclimate to true wilderness, but near enough to a stream and berry patches to provide reliable food sources. He'd prepared for weeks, gradually spending less time with Spirit, bringing fewer treats, creating more distance. Nothing had prepared him for the moment itself. They'd arrived at dawn. The forest was still wrapped in early morning shadows. Tom had led Spirit to the edge of the clearing, then removed the simple rope halter he'd used during their training trips. Spirit had looked at him questioningly, sensing something different in Tom's manner. "This is where we say goodbye, buddy," Tom said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "This is your home now." He turned and walked back to his truck without looking back, each step heavier than the last. In the rearview mirror, he'd seen Spirit standing motionless at the forest's edge, watching the truck drive away. That night, alone in his cabin for the first time in months, Tom had poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and silently toasted the empty room. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the warmth didn't reach him. A week later, the truth had come out. Another volunteer had overheard Tom talking in his sleep during a center overnight shift, disjointed words about a bear cub and fishing lessons. The story had emerged in pieces, culminating in a formal disciplinary hearing before the center's board. Michelle had been livid. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've potentially created a habituated predator that associates humans with food. People could die, Tom." Tom had accepted the reprimand, the probation, the additional shifts cleaning cages. What he couldn't accept was the uncertainty. Had he taught Spirit enough? Would the young bear survive the coming winter? Had he doomed the creature he tried to save? Years passed. Tom watched for signs during his forest walks, distinctive claw marks on trees, tracks with the slightly irregular pattern Spirit's paws had shown. But the Sierra Nevada was vast, and black bears were plentiful. Eventually, Tom had stopped looking, forcing himself to believe that no news was good news. Until now. The wounded bear swayed again, nearly collapsing. Tom snapped back to the present, adrenaline surging through his aging body. Without hesitation, he grabbed the emergency kit from under the seat and a container of honey he kept for his morning tea. Moving slowly but deliberately, he stepped out of the truck. "Spirit," he called softly. "It's me, old friend." The bear's head lifted at the sound of his voice. For a moment, neither moved. Man and bear locked in mutual recognition across species boundaries that suddenly seemed meaningless. Then Spirit took a halting step forward, then another, the metal trap dragging painfully across the ground. A low moan escaped the bear's throat, not threatening, but pleading. Tom's chest constricted. "I'm going to help you," he promised. "But I need you to trust me one more time." He opened the tailgate of his pickup and spread an old blanket across the bed. Then, uncapping the honey, he poured a generous amount onto the truck bed and stepped back. "Come on, buddy," he coaxed. "Let me take you somewhere safe." For a long moment, Spirit remained motionless, clearly torn between instinct and memory. Then, with agonizing slowness, the bear limped toward the truck. With tremendous effort, Spirit heaved himself into the bed, immediately collapsing from exhaustion. Tom quickly secured the tailgate and grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed. "Sarah, it's Tom. Emergency. I'm bringing in an injured black bear. Trap wound. Severe infection. And Sarah, it's him. It's Spirit." The silence on the other end lasted several heartbeats. "You're sure?" Dr. Michela's voice was tightly controlled. "Positive." The white chest marking. The scar on his muzzle from when he cut himself on my wood stove. "It's him, Sarah. And he found me. After 6 years, he found me." Another pause. "Get him here fast. I'll prep for surgery." Tom drove with careful urgency, constantly checking the rearview mirror. Spirit lay motionless in the truck bed, eyes half closed with exhaustion, but always returning to Tom's face in the mirror. "Hang on," Tom murmured each time their eyes met. "Just hang on." The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center appeared around the bend. A collection of low buildings surrounded by various enclosures and habitat spaces. As Tom pulled up to the treatment building, Dr. Michela was already waiting with a team and a transport cage. She was a compact woman in her 50s with short-cropped gray hair and the focused intensity of someone who had devoted her life to saving wild creatures. Her relationship with Tom had been strained since the Spirit incident years before, but professional respect had eventually replaced anger. Now, seeing the bear in Tom's truck, her expression shifted from skepticism to shocked recognition. "My God," she breathed. "It really is him." The team worked with quick efficiency, sedating Spirit and carefully transferring him to the treatment room. Tom hovered at the edges, unwilling to leave but trained well enough to stay out of the way. He watched as Sarah examined the trap, a cruel, illegal device with serrated jaws that had nearly severed Spirit's paw. "Poachers," she spat, her voice thick with disgust. "Same kind that killed his mother, I'd bet." The surgery lasted 3 hours. Tom sat outside the treatment room, his head in his hands, replaying every moment of his time with Spirit. Had it all been leading to this moment? The second chance? When Sarah finally emerged, her scrubs were blood-stained but her eyes were clear. "He'll live," she said without preamble. The infection hadn't reached the bone yet. We removed the trap, debrided the wound, and started him on antibiotics. He's severely malnourished and dehydrated, but bears are remarkably resilient. Can I see him? Tom asked, already rising. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. He's still sedated. We'll keep him under for at least 24 hours to let the initial healing begin. Spirit lay on a large examination table, his massive frame now highlighting how thin he'd become. His injured paw was heavily bandaged. IVs ran into his other leg, and a breathing tube helped maintain his sedation. But it was undeniably Spirit, the white star on his chest, the small notch in his right ear, the distinctive pattern on his muzzle. Tom approached slowly, his eyes burning with unshed tears. He gently placed his hand on Spirit's side, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing. "I'm here," he whispered. "I won't leave you this time." Sarah watched from the doorway, her scientific objectivity warring with the undeniable evidence before her. "He came back to you," she said finally. "After all these years," he remembered. Tom nodded, unable to speak. "That's not supposed to happen," she continued, more to herself than to Tom. "Wild animals don't. And they shouldn't." "He's not just any animal," Tom said simply. Sarah sighed, running a hand through her short hair. "The board will need to be notified. We'll have to decide what happens next." "A bear that seeks out human contact." "He didn't seek out human contact," Tom interrupted. "He sought me. And there's a difference." "Is there?" Sarah challenged, but her tone lacked conviction. "Get some rest, Tom. We'll talk tomorrow. You can use the volunteer quarters tonight." Tom didn't argue, though they both knew he wouldn't leave the building while Spirit remained unconscious. As she turned to go, Sarah paused. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think you did right by him all those years ago. I was angry, but he survived. He thrived until this." She gestured at the trap they had removed. "Maybe you gave him 6 good years he wouldn't have had otherwise." After she left, Tom pulled a chair beside Spirit's table. In the sterile quiet of the treatment room, he began to talk, telling Spirit about the years that had passed, the changes at the center, the lonely nights in the cabin where he'd sometimes imagined he heard bare feet padding across the porch. Somewhere in the early hours of morning, Tom drifted to sleep, his hand still resting on Spirit's flank, their breathing falling into synchrony as it had so many years before. The week that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Tom. Spirit's recovery became the center's primary focus, partly due to the unusual circumstances, partly because Dr. Michela had decided the case warranted special documentation for research purposes. Spirit was moved to a secluded recovery enclosure, a quiet space away from the center's visitor areas, with a sheltered den box and a small pool of fresh water. The space was designed to minimize stress while allowing for regular monitoring and treatment. Tom took a leave of absence from his regular volunteer duties, spending every day with Spirit. He was there when the bear first regained consciousness, confused and agitated until he recognized Tom's voice. He was there for each bandage change, each antibiotic injection, each small milestone in Spirit's recovery. Dr. Michela observed their interactions with growing wonder. "It defies explanation," she told her assistant one afternoon, watching as Spirit gently took berries from Tom's palm. "Bears don't maintain recognition of humans after years in the wild. They don't seek help when injured. They certainly don't allow medical treatment without resistance." "Maybe he's not really wild anymore," the assistant suggested. Sarah shook her head. "That's what's most extraordinary. His behavior with anyone else is appropriately defensive. He tolerates me because I've been present for his treatment, but he watches me like the predator he is. With Tom, she gestured to where the man and bear sat in companionable silence. With Tom, it's something else entirely. As Spirit's strength returned, the center's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Tom was asked to attend, knowing the subject would be Spirit's future. The boardroom was tense as Tom entered. 5 people sat around a polished table: Sarah, the center's director, Marcus Chan, 2 wildlife biologists he recognized from previous projects, and a representative from the state's Fish and Wildlife Department. Marcus spoke first. "Tom, thank you for joining us. We've been discussing the situation with the bear you've identified as Spirit." "There's no identified as," Tom corrected. "He is Spirit." Marcus nodded diplomatically. "Dr. Michela has confirmed the likelihood based on distinctive markings. What we need to discuss is what happens next." The wildlife representative, a stern woman in her 40s, leaned forward. "Mr. Bradley, I've reviewed the history here. You illegally raised this bear, attempted to teach it survival skills without proper training or authorization, and released it without protocol. Now the animal has returned, demonstrating concerning habituation behaviors." Tom felt his jaw tighten but said nothing. "However," she continued, "Dr. Michela has made a compelling case that this situation presents unique research opportunities. The documented recognition between you and this bear after 6 years of separation is unprecedented." One of the biologists, Reunites, picked up the thread. "We're considering 3 options. 1. Once healed, we relocate Spirit to a distant wilderness area, minimizing any chance of human contact. 2. We place him in a permanent sanctuary setting where his unusual history won't endanger him or others. Or 3, he glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly, we develop a specialized program. Spirit would remain at the center as part of our educational initiatives, with controlled access to both natural habitat and human interaction." Tom looked around the table, trying to read the room. "What are you leaning toward?" Marcus sighed. The department's initial recommendation was option 1, complete rewilding with relocation. Tom felt his heart sink. "He found me from miles away once. He'd do it again." "That's Dr. Bella's argument as well," Marcus acknowledged. "And frankly, after observing Spirit's behavior these past days, I'm inclined to agree. This bear has formed an attachment that won't be broken by distance." "So, the sanctuary, then?" Tom asked, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. Sanctuaries were better than zoos, but still, confinement, however comfortable, seemed a poor reward for Spirit's remarkable journey. Sarah cleared her throat. "Actually, I proposed a modified version of option 3. She slid a folder across the table to Tom. "An ambassador program, with Spirit as our first participant." Tom opened the folder to find detailed plans for a specially designed habitat, larger than standard enclosures, with access to a fenced section of forest and a unique feature, a small, cabin-like structure where Tom could stay during transitions. "The idea," Sarah explained, "is that Spirit would have the freedom to come and go from a protected wilderness area while still maintaining connection with the center, and with you. He would be a living example of wildlife rehabilitation, conservation, and the complex relationship between humans and wild animals." Tom looked up, hardly daring to hope. "You're suggesting he could be both wild and not?" "Exactly." Sarah's eyes shone with unusual emotion. "We've been too binary in our thinking. Spirit has shown us there can be something in between, a third path that honors both his wild nature and the connection he's formed. The discussion continued for hours, details debated, concerns raised and addressed. When the vote finally came, it was unanimous. Spirit would stay, under a groundbreaking new program that recognized his unique status. As Tom left the boardroom, Sarah fell into step beside him. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "The trap that injured Spirit, it wasn't the first one we've found. There's been an increase in illegal trapping in the eastern section of the forest. The department has been investigating, but resources are limited." Tom nodded grimly. "How can I help?" "For now, focus on Spirit. But once he's stronger, well, a man who knows the forest, and a bear who knows how to find traps, might make a formidable team." Spring turned to summer as Spirit's recovery progressed. The specialized habitat was constructed in record time, funded by a grant Sarah had secured from a conservation organization intrigued by Spirit's story. Tom divided his time between the center and his cabin, bringing personal items to make the new accommodations feel familiar for both of them. The day Spirit was released into the expanded habitat marked a turning point. Tom watched nervously as the bear explored the space, sniffing at trees, investigating the small stream that ran through one corner, testing the limits of the outer fence. For a heart-stopping moment, Spirit located a section where the fence was partially obscured by vegetation. He paused, seeming to assess whether he could climb over or push through. Tom held his breath. Then Spirit turned away, moving instead toward the small cabin where Tom's scent was strongest. He settled on the porch, stretching out in a patch of sunshine with a contented groan. Sarah, watching from a distance, shook her head in amazement. "He's choosing to stay," she murmured. "Even with the forest right there beyond the fence, he's choosing this middle ground." In the weeks that followed, a routine emerged. Spirit would spend his days roaming the habitat, fishing in the stream or climbing the sturdy oaks that dotted the enclosure. In the evenings, he would return to the cabin area where Tom waited, often bringing gifts of fish from the stream, interestingly shaped sticks, once even a pine cone that he dropped at Tom's feet with obvious pride. Visitors to the center were fascinated by Spirit's story. A special viewing platform was constructed at a respectful distance from the habitat, allowing people to occasionally observe the unusual bear who lived between worlds. Tom found himself reluctantly embracing a new role as an educator, sharing Spirit's journey and the lessons it offered about wildlife conservation. "The most important thing to understand," he would tell rapt audiences, "is that Spirit is not a pet. He's a wild animal who has made choices about his own life. Our job is to respect those choices while ensuring he remains healthy and safe." As Spirit's strength fully returned, Sarah approached Tom with the project she had hinted at months before. The illegal trapping operation had continued, with devastating effects on local wildlife. Spirit, with his extraordinary sensitivity to human scent and his ability to detect hidden traps, could help locate and remove these dangers before other animals suffered. Their first expedition was tentative, Spirit secured with a specialized tracking collar, Tom equipped with radio and tools for disabling traps. They moved through the forest together, an old man and a bear, communicating in ways that defied conventional understanding. When Spirit froze, hackles raised at the base of a lightning-struck pine, Tom investigated and found exactly what they'd feared: a cruel leg-hold trap, recently set and cleverly concealed. As he carefully disarmed it, Tom felt a surge of righteous satisfaction. This trap would never cause the suffering Spirit had endured. Over the following months, their partnership deepened. They located and disabled dozens of traps, gathered evidence that led to the arrest of 2 poaching rings, and established new protocols for wildlife protection that were adopted by centers across the state. Spirit became something of a local legend. Children would bring drawings of the hero bear to the center, and a local brewery even named a honey ale in his honor, donating a portion of proceeds to conservation efforts. Through it all, Tom watched Spirit with quiet wonder. The once tiny cub had grown into a magnificent adult bear, his black coat glossy with health, his movements powerful and confident. Yet when their eyes met across the habitat, Tom still glimpsed the curious, trusting spirit that had first captured his heart all those years ago. Time, which had seemed suspended in the magical bubble of their reunion, eventually reasserted itself. Tom celebrated his 70th birthday, then his 75th. His movements became slower, his hair whiter, though his devotion to spirit never wavered. The center expanded the ambassador program, adding other animals with unique circumstances. A one-winged eagle that had bonded with its rehabilitator, a wolf that had been raised among dogs and struggled to integrate with its own kind. Spirit remained the program's cornerstone, his story inspiring changes in wildlife management policies across the country. As Tom entered his 80s, he moved permanently into the cabin in Spirit's habitat. His own home in the forest had become too difficult to maintain, and the center had quietly modified his employment status to resident wildlife specialist, ensuring he would always have a place there. Spirit, too, showed signs of age. Black bears in the wild typically live 15 to 20 years, Spirit was approaching 18. His muzzle had begun to gray, and he moved with a slight stiffness on cold mornings. The injured paw, while healed, would occasionally trouble him during weather changes. They settled into a peaceful rhythm, 2 old souls sharing the gentle decline of their years. In summer, they would sit together by the stream, Tom reading aloud from nature books while Spirit dozed beside him. In winter, they would share the warmth of the cabin's fireplace, echoing those first nights of Spirit's cubhood. Visitors to the center often commented on the profound peace that seemed to emanate from the unusual pair. "It's like they found exactly where they belong," one observer noted. "Not quite in the human world, not quite in the wild, but in some perfect middle ground of their own making." Tom's 90th birthday was celebrated with a small gathering at the center. Sarah, now retired but still a regular visitor, presented him with a leather-bound photo album documenting his years with Spirit. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages, watching their shared journey unfold in images. "Thank you," he said simply, unable to find words for the gratitude that filled him. 3 years later, on a crisp autumn evening, Tom sat on the cabin porch with Spirit stretched out beside him, the bear's head resting on his leg, a familiar weight that had become as essential to Tom as breathing. "We've had quite a life, haven't we, old friend?" Tom murmured, his gnarled fingers gently stroking the bear's ears. "Not the one anyone would have predicted for either of us, but a good one all the same." Spirit made a soft chuffing sound, pressing closer against Tom's side. The sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber, reflecting in the stream that ran through their shared domain. Tom watched the light fade, feeling a strange peacefulness settle over him like a warm blanket. "I think I'll turn in early tonight," he told Spirit, slowly rising from his chair. The bear followed him inside, settling in his usual spot near the fireplace while Tom banked the coals for the night. As Tom prepared for bed, he felt an unusual weariness, not unpleasant, but pervasive, as if his body had finally decided to call in all its debts at once. He smiled faintly as he eased himself between the sheets, unsurprised when Spirit had abandoned his fireplace post to lie on the floor beside the bed. "Good night, Spirit," Tom whispered, reaching down to rest his hand on the bear's broad head. "I'll see you in the morning." Spirit made a low rumbling sound in response, the vocalization that, over the years, Tom had come to recognize as contentment. When the center staff arrived the next day for their morning checks, they found Tom still in bed, his face peaceful in eternal repose, one arm hanging down where his hand had rested on Spirit's head. The bear lay motionless beside him, his great heart stilled sometime in the night, as if unwilling to beat in a world where Tom no longer drew breath. The veterinarian who examined them confirmed what seemed impossible: both had died of natural causes within hours of each other. "It's as if," she said wonderingly, once one heart stopped, the other saw no reason to continue. They were buried together beneath the largest oak in Spirit's habitat, the tree where the bear had spent countless hours watching over his domain and where Tom had often sat reading in its shade. The simple headstone bore the inscription the board had unanimously approved: "Tom Bradley and Spirit. They taught us that love knows no boundaries." The ambassador program continued, inspired by their legacy. New animals found their own paths between wilderness and companionship, and new humans learned to listen more carefully to the wild voices around them. And at the old forest intersection, where their journey had come full circle, a small bronze plaque was placed, telling of an unlikely friendship that had changed how people understood their relationship with the natural world. Local hikers often report that on misty mornings, when the sun is just beginning to burn through the fog, they glimpse two figures moving quietly among the trees, an old man and a large bear, walking side by side as they disappear into the heart of the forest. Some say it's just a story, a legend born from grief and hope. Others, those who knew Tom and Spirit, simply smile and say nothing. Some bonds, they know, are too profound to be broken, even by death. In the Sierra Nevada, where ancient pines whisper secrets to those who listen closely, the story of Tom and Spirit lives on. A reminder that sometimes the most important boundaries are the ones we choose to cross, and the most powerful healing comes when we recognize ourselves in the eyes of another, no matter how different they may seem.